for November open, and thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri, the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. Councillors, I'd like to refer you to our recording of meeting statement. As you know, we are now live streaming, and I would draw everyone's attention to our policy in regards to that live streaming, and indeed any of the recording that may be available here at our meeting. Apologies for non-attendance. I believe everybody is accounted for. Disclosures of interest. Madam GM, do we have any disclosure of interest for the business here this evening?
Yes, Mr Mayor, we have one declaration of conflict of interest. That is from yourself, Councillor Scott Ferguson. It is for the report item number 13 on page 68, which is the Carcoar Sports Ground Amenities Block tender. And the reason for the pecuniary interest is that Councillor Ferguson contracts to one of the tenderers for this project.
Thank you. No other declarations of interest. I'd like to now refer you to the first item number 1, page 5, which are the minutes of the previous council meeting held 21st of October. Do I have a mover? Thank you. Councillor Kingham has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Somervale. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, any matters arising from those minutes? If not, I'll refer you now to item 2, page 12, application for leave of absence. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Newstead has moved that way and Councillor Ewan has seconded that. I'll put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 3, page 13, Drought Communities Program Extensions. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way and Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A couple of comments. It needs to be highlighted to the community again, as previously when this funding did arise, that it is for councils for community projects and not direct farmer drought funding, so that needs to be highlighted. I would also, as a side issue to highlighting the drought support, whether the General Manager in her column could actually highlight what assistance council may provide. We did pass a recommendation, I think it was late last year, on support from council, and that would still be current. And the other issue is with regard to the $3,000 that's available to each landholder. My understanding is the Salvation Army is administering that in Blaney Shire. There's a couple of different organisations that are administering it. It's not available as yet, and people can't apply as yet, but that money should be available to farmers, so this is directly to farmers, in the next couple of weeks, I understand. That's federal government assistance being administered through the Salvation Army. I understand people in our Shire can pre-register for that assistance at the moment, but you'll only get an email back from the Salvation Army once that assistance is available, and hopefully available in a couple of weeks. But with regard to the $1 million that is available to our community groups across the Shire and to council itself, I strongly encourage personally all community groups to look at putting in applications for projects across the Shire. The last one, I think it was 11 projects that we did fund across the Shire, many successful projects and many communities that have received a great assistance. So hopefully this second round will also provide support to those communities, and particularly to enhance and develop and provide opportunity for tradespeople and business operators to gain assistance during this downturn during the drought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments, councillors? It has been the first round was very successful, and we will be engaging the community as we did before, but there is a little bit of urgency around this. That's why we're going out now, and obviously hopefully get responses late January. Okay, no other questions or comments, councillors? I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to item 4, page 18, the report of council investments as at the 31st of October. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Newstead has moved that way and Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report? Pretty straightforward, thank you. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 5, page 23, quarterly budget review statement, September 2019. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Someone would like to move? Councillor Kingham has moved that way and Councillor Somervale, I believe, has seconded that. Any questions or comments in regards to this report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a couple of questions with regard to the carry forward of funds for a couple of projects. And I'm finding it difficult to actually ascertain where that full money is going. And if, for example, the Belubula Walkway says we carried forward $208,000. The most I can find is, I think it was 60, something that was actually in the QBRS for that particular project, and some money for Ogilvy Street. Finding it difficult to actually see where all of that money is gone from the carry forwards of funds. So I don't know if the director can provide an answer tonight, but maybe a question on notice. I only saw it very late this afternoon, so apologies for not sending a question through to the director beforehand.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr. Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, I don't have that information at hand, so I will take that on notice. However, Councillor Reynolds, I'll probably need to touch base with you because I'm not clear on the information you're seeking. So I might, if you could maybe confirm in an email or
Okay,
just the detail you're seeking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Somervale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just got a couple of questions or clarifications in relation to the movement in restricted reserves. The first one, the developer contributions reserve. I'm on page 41 of the business paper now. The developer contributions externally restricted reserve, we're taking 339,000 out of that reserve. Which is a big 40% of the balance as at the start of the financial year. What have we applied that money towards? Because with the various subdivisions going on, I would have expected the developer contributions reserve to be increasing, and we've taken some money, well, we're about to approve taking money out of it. I just want to know what that was for. I don't know whether that needs to be on notice or not. And while I've got the second one on the same page, the property, I think I know the answer to this one, the property account, which started the year at 1.4 million, has had 515,000 added to it. Now I assume that's the Plum Street money which we topped up into the property account once we borrowed from T Corp, but that looks like a little bit more than that. Anyway, so there's just two questions on these movement in the reserves.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr. Director, developer contributions.
No, I'll take both. I don't have that information at hand, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, so I'll take those both on notice and provide. Sorry, I've got the Director Planning here.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Director.
the movement from developer contributions is for the upgrade, which is
Okay.
off memory. I think it was loan, developer contributions, and centre.
And there was some other reserve I think we've taken. Yes, the Centre Point reserve itself we've taken 479 out of. Okay, I forgot some of that was coming out of developer contributions. Thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you. And I guess we'll take on notice the question about the property account. Councillor Somervale, thank you. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, thank you, councillors. Now refer you to item 6, page 49. Now, before I ask for a mover and second, I'd like to invite our auditor, Leanne Smith from Intensys Accountants, to make her presentation in regards to our audited financial statements. And lovely to see you again, Leanne. It's a lovely ongoing association. Thank you.
Right to go?
Please.
Good-o. Right. I guess Intensys is the audit service provider for the New South Wales Audit Office. So the director who actually signs off on your reports at the Audit Office is Karen Taylor. She wasn't able to be here tonight. Before we get into, and I'm doing the wrong thing, before we get into the numbers, probably just want to touch base on a couple of things that the Audit Office has on their agenda for both this year and next year, probably more just as a way of information for Council. So the current year, the focus of the Audit Office, in addition to the statutory audit work on the financial reports, we're also required to collect some information for use in the Auditor General's report to Parliament, which comes out in about March each year. So the one on the 2019 financial statement review will come out in March 2020. Key focus areas for that for this year were gifts and benefits, so looking at policies, procedures, registers, fraud, so fraud controls, cyber security, IT controls, and again, a lot of that was more about governance, policies, procedures, documentation. So when the management letter is issued for, and not just Blaney, but for all councils, you'll probably see that there'll be a heavy focus on these sorts of items as well, and that they will be in the report to Parliament. Also, credit cards, which you would be aware has been quite topical over the last probably 12 to 18 months. And infrastructure, property, plant and equipment is always a key focus area, simply because of not just the size of it, but the fact that it's revalued on a periodic basis. So there's a lot of assumptions, and subjectivity can be coming into play with those sorts of calculations, and they're big numbers. And then the other item is the preparedness for new accounting standards. So there are I guess two, there are actually three, but there's two main categories of accounting standards coming into play from next financial year. So one of those sets relates to revenue recognition. So that will potentially change the way in which Council, in particular, recognises revenue from certain grants and contributions that are received. That's probably the main area that is going to be impacted. And there's also a new lease accounting standard which is coming in, which will impact on the way that leases, and not just arrangements that are called leases, but potentially other contracts or arrangements that councils have, may also now fall into that definition of a lease under this accounting standard. So that's obviously been a focus area this year. Probably the other thing I just wanted to flag as well in terms of this year, the Audit Office does actually have a data visualisation tool on their website. So it's publicly available. It's actually very user-friendly. You can actually go in, you can look up Blaney Shire Council, it will show all your results, and then the bit that usually interests people is that you can then compare yourself to other councils. So you can pick any other council in the state, you can pick councils in your group, you can pick councils in your region, and it will provide you key information and do a comparison of those numbers and results. Next year, died. Credit cards, again, next year are a key focus. So credit card management is going to be looked at next financial year, so 2020 audit. Also, developer contributions and voluntary planning agreements will be getting looked at in more detail, and also there'll be a review of procurement management across the sector as well. They're the sorts of things that you'll probably see a focus on in terms of reporting, and again, this will be for the report to Parliament in 2021. After 30 June 2020, they're also looking at audits of audit risk and improvement committees. Council would be aware there's been some draft guidelines issued in relation to that, so I'm assuming that it's going to be a follow-on from that to see how it's been implemented and managed. Also, cybersecurity, bit of a hot topic at the moment, pretty much everywhere. And then also looking at fees and charges on rural water supply and sewerage. Oh, that's Audit Office, so Blaney Shire Council. So in terms of the numbers that have probably, or the events that have impacted on the financials this year, that Communities Funding Program, there was about $1 million received under that program for this year. About half of that was completed directly by council, and half of it was provided to community groups to undertake projects directly. Council also received $2.3 million contribution from Cadia towards the Southern Cadia access route. There were no revaluations in the current year. However, councils are required to index their water and sewer assets on an annual basis by a set percentage. For Blaney, that meant the sewerage assets increased by another $311,000. There was a loss on the write-off of some infrastructure assets during the current year. And I know council has been briefed about this previously. So there was funding received under various programs during the year. A number of instances, this saw existing assets being written off in full during the year, as they were obviously demolished in order to enable the construction of the new assets. Going forward, forward planning by the operational staff to identify the assets which need to be demolished and replaced. And where funding's involved, our suggestion would be that that's involved as part of the assessment of the funding application and acceptance. And it's not saying that that should sway the decision necessarily, but it should be taken into account at that point rather than at the end. Notifying finance staff as early as possible, and I appreciate that sometimes that's not always possible. But then that gives the finance team the ability to check the numbers, ensure it's included in the QBRs. If we've got over 12 months going forward, then that gives them the opportunity, and as they should, to accelerate depreciation on those assets if we know that they're going to be written off or demolished. Ultimately, it's a case of everybody working together and letting everybody know what's happening, so that there's no surprises for council at year end, which is unfortunately what the situation was this year. And I think this year's been exacerbated because you had quite a high level of grants that were received that fell into this category. Oftentimes, a lot of the grant funding is for new assets entirely, so this isn't a, this is. There was a prior period change in the financial reported in the financial statements this year as well. As part of the work that was done for this report to Parliament last year, for 2017-2018, the Audit Office requested that a comparison for all councils be held of council records of Crown land against records held by the relevant department. So discrepancies were identified, and not just here. It was pretty widespread. And in 2019 year, the staff here at Blaney actually undertook a detailed review to quantify the discrepancy and also make sure that the differences were correct, so that that council and the department basically agreed on what assets were held by council or were in council's control, not just simply a case of just accepting what the department told council they felt they should have. So that resulted in $959,000 being added to the value of council's land as a prior period adjustment. The good news is that land isn't depreciable, so that won't impact on the depreciation expense going through. Okay, results. So consolidated operating result for the year was, after capital grants, was a surplus of 8.7, nearly $8.8 million, but before capital grants, it was just under $400,000 deficit. In terms of the revenue, the items that impacted on that, the rates and annual charges have gone up slightly compared to the prior year. Probably the big area that you can see the jump is then that capital grants and contributions figure, where there's about $500,000 worth of funding from the Drought Communities program in there, but also that $2.3 million from CADIA. And that big jump in the operating grants a couple of years ago is from the FAG timing primarily. Operating expenditure, so that was sitting at $18.8 million for the year. It was up a little bit on the prior year. Employee costs and your materials and contracts will fluctuate from year to year, depending on the mix of capital and operational work that's undertaken. The big change there is that final column that's showing that $3.6 million in other expenses, and most of that increase is attributable to that loss on the write-off of infrastructure assets during the year. Does anybody have any questions on that as we're going through this? Get your hand up.
Well, at the end or now, whatever you like. Or is it the end?
Is it particularly about the
Do it however
depreciation?
you'd like.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, let's, Councillor
Yeah,
Somerville.
About the loss on write-off of replaced assets. Your comment struck a chord with me in relation to no surprises, because we did get a surprise last
Don't
year.
like surprises. Nobody likes surprises
But
like that.
this year, as we've just approved in the QBRS, we are now anticipating exactly the same thing this year, but bigger numbers again. Current projection is 694,000 loss before capital grants. It looks like we're going to have 2 years impacted by this, and apart from the obvious poor-looking operational performance ratio, because we'll be negative for 2 years, and in fact the trend has been quite high, then going down, and now looks like a couple of years in the negative. So apart from the impact on the ratio, is that something councillors should be concerned about because of where it arises from?
I think the real question is does council believe that grant funding is such it's worthwhile for the loss? The write-off is a byproduct of obtaining the grant funding and building new assets, building better assets, which is certainly what happened with, I think it was it Browns Creek Road, where you had a bridge, you got some funding to build a new bridge, but you built a better bridge because you decided that the existing one functionality, it would be better if the functionality of the bridge was improved. I'm talking about the right bridge, yes? Yep. So, yes, you've taken a hit in terms of that write-off. That's not a cash entry, that's a book entry, it's an accounting entry. So the question is really about, well, do we believe that the nature of that funding and what that funding is allowing you to do is appropriate? And I guess what I'm saying about making sure that you take this into account is that if you're thinking about it up front and those surprises aren't there, yes, you might still have a write-off and it might still be an unappealing number, but at least you knew about it.
Yeah, and if you know about it over the course of a couple of years, you you can write it down more quickly so that the hit
That's
is...
right. So if you know you've got something and you're going to be demolishing an asset in 2 years' time, that also, and you should be under the accounting standard, is going, well, we've got no use for that asset in 2 years' time. We need to reassess the useful life of that asset. And that means instead of depreciating it over the next 20 years, we're going to depreciate it over the next 2 years. So, yeah, it's just about forward planning.
I think you said it's not a sort of a cash issue, it's an accounting treatment. Is there no prospect, though, given that it's just an accounting treatment, so to speak, of rather than taking it as a loss in the profit and loss account, writing it off against asset revaluation reserves or something like that? So it doesn't... It seems strange that something like that impacts trading profit and loss.
Yep. We did discuss that, and it wasn't the revaluation information council had wasn't in sufficient detail to enable the identification of that asset specifically, because you still need, particularly with something like the bridge, you need to be able to specifically know which bits went away, which bits got left. But that is certainly something that we discussed with the director and with the CEO in terms of this year. We weren't able to do it for this year because we couldn't get a good enough handle on what actual number could be written off, but it's certainly something that will be taken into consideration in future years.
Including the year we're in now, and at least we've got a fair bit of notice that it's coming up. And I understand exactly what you said about last year, because we didn't have time to do anything about it, which is the benefit of early warning.
Yes.
And if there's a prospect that it can be set off against asset revaluation reserve, then that, from my sort of point of ignorance, that seems like a much more sensible treatment.
It is, and that would be the preferred treatment, is to reverse the part of it that's been revalued and then take the loss, but you need to be able to specifically identify, and I think, again, because this was all sort of done in retrospect, there wasn't that information. Again, that would form part of going forward.
I've got another question.
Councillor Somerville.
Doesn't relate to the asset write-offs, though.
You have the floor.
Got the floor, thank you. I'll be quick. Unrestricted cash. We've been sailing pretty close to the line.
One?
Yeah, unrestricted. See, you can hardly even see it down the last 2 years
Yeah,
there.
we've got more than last year.
That's right. I've had a look at most of our sort of peer councils around the region, and they all have reasonably healthy unrestricted cash. And I know John O'Malley had a view in relation to this. Do you think there's a problem if every year we only have about 2 and 6pence in unrestricted cash?
Not necessarily. I mean, the external restrictions they are what they are. The internal restrictions are at council's discretion. If council felt there was an issue with your internal restriction or with your unrestricted cash, then you have the capacity to move those restrictions as you see fit. But in terms of ratios, numbers, operations, I've seen councils with a lot less than that. So it's not something that tends to raise flags or concerns, because you do have control over that internally restricted figure. So you've always got that capacity to balance those out if you feel you need to.
It doesn't show any sort of red flags with the audit office?
No,
that's not
at all. If it goes
it's
into
not on their
negative,
list
you're
of
in
things.
trouble.
Yeah.
But as long as it's positive, and certainly the one ratio that sort of talks about unrestricted is your unrestricted current ratio, and it actually only excludes your external restrictions. It actually includes the internally restricted funds. So that ratio is not being distorted by the mix between internal and unrestricted. Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville.
Investments, 16.5 mil. Unrestricted cash, as we just talked about, was just under 60,000. The current year, the externally restricted has jumped up a little bit. That includes this year $881,000 worth of unexpended loan funds that were drawn down but hadn't been utilised by the end of the year. So that's the reason for the jump in that. And your internally restricted assets and your plant replacements reserves have come down a little bit, and that's why there's a decrease in the internal restrictions. External debt, as you would know, that's jumped up. Council's been, after a period of not drawing any loans, Council's drawn funds down in the last couple of years. So that's the reason, obviously, for the jump in that. There was $1.3 million drawn down this year. And then that's obviously flown through into this debt service cover ratio, where it's starting to come down. And the reason for that is that increase in your borrowings. So that ratio is looking at how much cash basically council has available to service its debt. Unrestricted current ratio. So this is what we were talking about before. So when it talks about unrestricted, it's only excluding externally restricted. So anything that's internally restricted is still included in this calculation, and it's sitting at it's sitting at 3.94. Which is above the benchmark of 1.5, which has been set by the OLG, and it's been above that for a number of years. So that one's all good. Unpaid rates. This has ticked up a little bit this year, not by much, marginally, but it has gone up a little bit. What I would say is 2.29% is still incredibly good result in terms of debtor management. The benchmark for a rural council is under 10%. A metropolitan council is under 5%. So you're still well below that ratio as well. Operating performance. And I've got another slide, a couple up, that'll show this. So this did decrease this year, and it actually has fallen below the benchmark, which is 0%. So councils is sitting at, I think it's negative 0.6 in my head, or something thereabouts. So it's only marginally below the benchmark. This is one of the ratios that is impacted by, negative 0.6, by the mix of operating capital grants that council receives. So your other revenue can be stable, and this ratio can still deteriorate because of the relative proportions. Similarly to this one, which is your own source operating revenue. So this is saying, is council able to contain its expenditure within its operating revenue? So if you didn't get grants and contributions, could you still operate? Benchmark for this is 60%. Council was marginally under last year, and it's council's at 50.9 this year. When you look at the dollar figures though, so even though that ratio looks like it's deteriorated significantly, the numerator in this ratio is your own source revenue. So rates, fees, annual charges, other income. So it's actually gone up slightly this year. So the reason the ratio has deteriorated is because your grants and contributions went up significantly. And I guess this is the thing with the ratios, you need to just be conscious of how they're calculated and what impacts them. So pretty much the only thing that's made your ratio drop is the fact that you got those additional grants and contributions. So, which isn't a bad thing, but it makes your ratio look unpleasant. That's pretty much all for me. So the audit reports were issued in mid-October, which was actually near the front of the pack, actually, I think, from memory. There were an awful lot went in the couple of days up to the 31st, so that was a good result. Council met its reporting obligations to the Office of Local Government. The management letters that we've issued, or the Audit Office has issued throughout the year, the issues that have been raised in them have been addressed. There are a number that are carried over from prior years. However, one that's fairly typical across the industry at the moment with some of these other issues that the Audit Office has been flagging, such as IT and cyber. But they're also, the ones that are probably still there are the ones that aren't able to be immediately rectified. They're things like policies, procedures, documentation, things that do take a little bit of time and a little bit of resources to address. So there's certainly no concerns from our perspective or from the Audit Office perspective in terms of those matters. As always, Anton and Tiff and their staff, we come in and do the audit, they have to do a lot of preparation to get ready for us to be here, and having 3 or 4 auditors run around while you're trying to get your normal daily tasks done as well can't be easy. So as always, big thank you to them for their assistance. Then if anybody else has any questions, or if Councillor Somerville has any further questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Leanne. I'm sure there's probably a couple of questions, but thank you for your presentation. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Somerville stole some of my thunder, so thank you. But one question I do have is with regard to employee leave entitlements, which have gone up, I think, nearly $100,000 in the last year. Is it something that we should, as a council, be looking at and just monitoring so that that our staff aren't building up huge amounts of extra leave?
Yes. Yes, you should be.
So is that type of a jump concerning, or is it just within the normal bounds?
No, it's not. The other thing that the other thing with employee leave entitlements as well is that it's not. There's some accounting adjustments that are made. So your payroll people will run off a raw report that says somebody's owed 25 hours. The value of that for inclusion in the financial statements is not as simple as saying, well, 25 hours by their pay rate is the answer. There's probabilities, there's indexation for and discounting back to when we think these people might actually take their leave. So what can happen is that these numbers can actually, there's obviously you need to be monitoring people's hours and ensuring that they're getting taken. Where possible, obviously operational concerns come into that in terms of you still need bodies on the ground, particularly if you've got a lot of projects going on. But there also are other adjustments that come into it in terms of inflation rates, discount factors, and they can change from year to year depending on what the market, But that jump, from our perspective, is not of concern for us.
Any question?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments? I'd just like to, Leanne, just in regards to Councillor Somerville's questions around depreciation, it's been quite the perfect storm for us, and it's never happened really in the history of our shire to be, if you like, have the opportunity to have so many opportunities to replace some of this infrastructure, because as we all know, councils right across the state get heavily criticised for this infrastructure backlog that we all have acquired over many generations. So I don't think we make too many excuses for doing what we've done. It's certainly been a learning experience, and it has certainly set us up to be a better council in the future as far as our asset management systems, how they talk to our asset management plan and how our finance. So it's been a really positive experience for us, and I think with your input as well now with your audit, I think that's something to work on. I know councillors are very aware of the effect it has had on our numbers, but out in the community it's been so positive that we've had this rare opportunity to spend some money on behalf of state and federal governments to actually improve our infrastructure backlog.
Certainly some of the community projects that have been done would not have happened otherwise.
Absolutely. But I do pick up your point. I know it's one that Councillor Sunvale has made about the merit of taking every single grant that comes up. And I think there is some thinking around weighing up the pros and cons of future grants, not only for the effect it might have on depreciation, but also the ongoing, if you like, maintenance and upkeep of these new assets, which do come at a intergenerational cost, an ongoing cost. Just a quick question in regards to, you're talking about some of the reviews coming up around credit cards and procurement. Did strike me in regards to potential reviews around water and sewer. Now, as you know, we just deal with sewer. We're just doing our developer contribution plan now and our long-term business plan for our sewer. And certainly Councillor Somerville would probably agree, we aspire to best practice, and there's lots of reasons we all have to be best practice in regards to our sewer and water. What do you think the purpose of reviews or audits into charges for sewer and water what would the purpose be?
I'm not 100% sure what the background for that is, but I'd suggest it's just a process of ensuring that, and I think maybe part of it is the fact that it's a rural or regional council issue. It's not something that impacts most of the metropolitan councils, and some of the other reviews that have been conducted have probably been weighted a little bit more towards that. So that's a possibility. I suspect it probably is more about just ensuring that every council will say that they're following best practice and ensuring that that's what's actually happening. I probably don't have any further insight into that, but I'm happy to take that on notice and follow that up with the Audit Office.
You know, it's just an interesting...
Yep.
as you
Because
say,
we would usually get a...
tick in the box in regards to...
we would usually get a briefing from them in probably about February, March about what they're going to look at for that year, and they'd provide a little bit more light at that point.
Yeah, appreciate a heads up at that point, I'm sure. Thank you. Councillor Somerville.
Maybe I just add a comment in relation to that. I suspect what the Audit Office is interested in there is local water utilities in local government hands. They're not so worried about metropolitan councils because, particularly with Sydney Water and Hunter Water, they're regulated by IPART, and the government's quite confident that they set charges at the appropriate level. And whilst local water utilities are certainly not regulated by IPART, they're regulated by the department under best practice, I suspect the Audit Office is thinking that maybe a lot of it really is self-regulation, and their concern is not overcharging. Their concern is probably, are local government-owned utilities charging enough to recover the cost of their assets?
And that's probably, I mean, I didn't think about it before, but it's probably a good point. They would audit most of those entities, and possibly it's something where they're looking to leverage the knowledge that they have from those out to the rural area. And rural because, as I said, like the metropolitan councils don't do water and sewerage. So that could be part of it as well, that they've got that experience in-house and they're looking to leverage off it. But I'll let you know.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. If there's no other questions, Leanne, thank you on behalf of my fellow councillors for your work, and thank you for your kind words to our very hard-working staff. We may be small, but they do a wonderful job in at times very difficult circumstances. So again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you next year.
Some of you on Thursday. Good night.
Thanks very much. Okay, councillors, we now move back to the report. On page 6, page 49, there's recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Denton has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead. Any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. You councillors, now item 7, page 55, the lease of industrial land for agistment purposes. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Any questions or comments regards to this item? Oh, everyone happy? No questions or comments? I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 8, page Unknown Reserve Trust, licence to Essential Energy. Recommendations there 1, 2, 3 and 4. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments regards to this report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is with regard to the time of the lease or the term of the lease being 12 months. I'd just like a quick explanation of why we're only taking a 12-month lease on a fixed asset that's going to sit there probably for 30 or 40 or 50 years.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr. Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, the purpose of this licence is as an interim arrangement until Essential Energy formalise an easement. And it's in fact hoped that they'll be able to fast track an easement and there'll be no need for a licence. But it's really to ensure that operations aren't impacted by any delay in getting the substation finalised.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments in regards to this item, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 9, page 60, Director of Infrastructure Services Monthly Report. Recommendation there. To have a mover for this recommendation. Councillor Denton has moved that way and Councillor Kingham has seconded that. Questions or comments in regards to the Director's report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, congratulations to the infrastructure staff with regards to Burnt Yards Road. I happened to go on the hairpin bend yesterday, going to Junction Reefs, and the work that's being done on that will actually make that bend so much safer, better. It'll still be a hairpin bend, but the widening of the road and the job there, it's frustrating, I suppose you could say, that we haven't done the entire length of the job that we were aiming to do. And I'm just sort of wondering if down the track that maybe heavy patching to finish off. There's a couple of sections, probably about 2 kilometres of Burnt Yards Road that probably could be improved and widened slightly, and heavy patching might be a solution there, just to have a fantastic road pretty well from Mandurama all the way through to the Yarrawonbang Road. So I don't think there's really a question there, it's more an observation. But to congratulate the staff on doing a great job there. With regard to Yarrawonbang Road, which I also travelled down yesterday, there seems to be a lot of grass growing up in the road, in the bitumen, that's come up through, I suppose, that there would be cracks. So it's probably leading to a rapid deterioration of some of that lower section of Yarrawonbang Road towards Penuara Road. So I was just wondering whether there are any options there to maybe spray that grass out in the bitumen to maybe preserve that road for a longer period, because as we know, that grass expands and eventually cracks and deteriorates the road further. So that's a question to the Director.
Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'll certainly take that on notice and get the staff to look at it.
And my other quick question or comment, I suppose, is congratulations to the ground staff for the work that they've done, and particularly around Millthorpe, around the Garden Ramble time, but also in Blaney and the other villages. How neat the villages have really come up, that it's a great credit to the Parks and Garden staff on what they've done, and the mowing staff around that. And one other quick, or two other quick notes. A thank you from some of the residents on Forest Reefs Road for the line marking that was done. That's making that road a lot safer than previously, because you couldn't see a lot of the line marking. And also the work that was done at Carrington Park on the footpath. There was a tripping incident there at the previous farmers market, and I was having a look at that work on my way to the council meeting tonight, and it's a vast improvement and a great risk reduction. So again, a good little job which has possibly saved someone from a potential major injury.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions? Councillor Kingham.
Well, following on from Councillor Reynolds thanking the staff, yesterday we had the privilege of Mr Rod Smith, who's the chairman of Racing New South Wales, Harness Racing New South Wales here in Blaney for the TAB meeting, and in his speech in presenting to a winning driver, he complimented the local harness racing club, which are few in number, but he just made a comment that Blaney has one of the most picturesque harness racing venues in New South Wales, if not Australia, and that's a tribute to the staff to present the ground in that way, and it certainly makes it easier for the local harness racing club, who are few in number, to conduct a very successful TAB meeting, which is conducted, I presume, throughout Australia on television. So it went off beautifully well, and to have Mr Rod Smith and Mr Jim Nugent present for that harness racing meeting is a tribute to their thoughts of Blaney progressing very satisfactorily and able to conduct a meeting. And Mr Smith made mention that he's a ratepayer in Blaney Shire, having land at Forest Reefs, and that's a great attribute for Blaney. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kingham. I certainly endorse your comments. Councillors, any other questions? Or Councillor Somerville?
Just a quick question in relation to the fixing up the dam wall for the maturation pond at the treatment plant, which I've noticed driving along Hobbies Yards Road. There was no evidence, I take it, that there was any escape of untreated water before we got onto the job of fixing it?
You, Mr Mayor, no.
Excellent. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to the Director's report? Apart from, I'll just quickly again endorse the comments of my fellow councillors. When you think of the major events that we've had, from the Lyndhurst Festival to the Neville Show, Carcool Show, Garden Ramble as mentioned by Councillor Reynolds, the effort of the staff in such a very difficult spring has been phenomenal, and as we've heard from Councillor Kingham and Councillor Reynolds, we're actually still getting wonderful feedback when most of the state is in real trouble. So we do need to acknowledge the extra effort and work that goes into our outdoor staff to do that, and we're going to see them perform through a very long hot summer to keep a lot of our trees and our vegetation infrastructure, which is so important to our ratepayers, alive. So very, very good that we recognise the challenges and what they have achieved. Councillors, no other questions or comments. I'd like to put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Council, now move through to item 10, page 64, the proposed road closure, Yarrumbang Road, Southern Cadia access route. There's a recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Questions or comments? Councillors, regards to this report? All good? Straightforward? Thank you. No questions, comments. I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, we now move into matters to be dealt with in closed committee, and as a result, when we do go into closed committee, our live streaming will be suspended until the council meeting will be reopened. So in accordance with the Local Government Act 93 and the Local Government Regulation 2005, in the opinion of the General Manager, the following business is of a kind as referred to in section 10.2 of the Act and should be dealt with in part of the media and public. We go into closed committee. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somerville. I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? Carried.
$58,406.72 ex-GST, $284,247.40 including GST and subject to variations. Thank you very much. Okay, hang on, I'll have to... Have you gone, maybe? Thank you. And the two other recommendations in the closed committee, fellows, was for item 11, bad debt write-off, D85748. Recommendation was that council approve the write-off of irrecoverable deferred debtor in the amount of $25,850.40 as follows. D85748, Tamara Lillian Ford, $25,850.40. And the recommendation for item Item 12, offer of lands passed in for sale of land for unpaid rates. The recommendation which was passed and there was that council accept the offer from RJ Stack Primary Limited for the sale of 24A Trunky Street, Newbridge, Lot E, DP 383876 for the amount of $4,470. Point 2, that council endorsing execution of relevant contracts and associated documentation by the Mayor and General Manager under council seal. Point 3, that council invite expressions of interest for remaining unsold parcels of land passed in from the 2014 auction. Thank you very much. Yeah. Would the Mayor like to come back and take the chair, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor Ewan. Now that that concludes our business here this evening, so in closing this meeting, I would just like to acknowledge all the wonderful volunteer firefighters throughout our state and our region and the work they're doing at this moment, and I suspect that they'll be busy for quite a while, but I think it's very appropriate at this time we do recognise their efforts. So, councillors, no other business to discuss here tonight. I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much for your attendance.